Welcome, everybody, and good evening. It is very nice to be here this evening, and we have a PolarConnect event. We haven't had one of these for quite some time. We'll be hearing from teacher Jon Pazol about his recent expedition, which happened actually, as we were discussing earlier, in the fall of 2021. Today is January 27th, 2022. And I just want to welcome all of you. And this is a fairly informal presentation. We asked Jon to talk very specifically to the two cohorts, and there are some researchers from his research team that are here as well. But feel free to jump in, ask your questions, and have an open discussion about his experience. And I think that's it for me. I'm going to just turn this over to Jon, and he's going to share his experience with us. So thanks, Jon, and everybody for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, because I know it's a busy time of year, and it's that sort of doldrums where Christmas break was so far away and spring break is nowhere on the horizon yet. So I get it. So yes, I had the very good fortune to actually go on my Polar Trek expedition. My expedition was the Nansen and Amundsen Basin Observational Systems, also known as NABOS or NABOS expedition. I was aboard the RV Akademik Tryoshnikov, which is a Russian icebreaker. The principal scientist was Igor Polyakov, and then Laura Whitmore from UAF, I think, is here. Lauren Kipp was also one of my scientists, and Elena Sparrow was facilitated with some things with the GLOBE program. I think, if everybody, I don't know if everyone knows each other, if you want to put your introduction and, things in the chat box, or we can, just go on. I don't know if you want to do that. Everyone here is very familiar with Polar Trek, so I think we can skip through this. Yes, Janet? Yeah, okay. Yeah, any questions in the chat box, either type them in, or better yet, just take your sound off and feel free to interrupt. So a little bit about our thing. So we were on the NABOS 2021 expedition. We were in the Siberian Arctic. We left from Kirkenes, Norway, the topmost part of Norway, right on the Russian border. In fact, there was a sign in downtown Kirkenes that we were closer to the North Pole than we were to Oslo, which was always interesting. And basically we sailed almost all the way around the world, or halfway around the world. I think at one point we were north over Alaska. We were saying, just really much quicker to just head south and take us home and let us go there. But instead we sailed all the way back. So we were in both the basins as we went from the Barents around through the Kara, Laptev, and East Siberian seas. Where we went, so this was our, and Laura will laugh, this was our cruise plan. It was supposed to look like a nice crown of, these are all the ice stations and sampling stations. It really looked like a smushed crown because they weren't predicting much ice, and lo and behold, there was lots and lots of ice. So we had every day, and Laura was in charge of this, the board of lies, it just changed every minute and was just getting a little frustrating for lots of people. But it basically said where we were supposed to be, what time we'd get there. And I think, we ran out of dry erase marker because we just kept changing it all the time. Beautiful. We had great weather except for the first 3 days, and the last about 3 days, we sailed away into storms and then sailed back through a storm. So that was entertaining. But the Siberian Arctic, we had some days of open water, but fairly calm, and then lots of days of ice. Here are researchers, again, Igor, Laura, and then Lauren Kipp from Rowan University, who basically took me under their wing and, put me to work and, just taught me a whole lot and gave me lots to do. And they were amazing, amazing facilitators for the experience. What we were doing and what we're looking at, the whole point of NABOS, it's been going on since 2012, and its job is to basically chronicle what the changes are in the Arctic Ocean. And so they've been doing sampling, sending down moorings, and doing water chemistry and all different things since then, every 2 or 3 years, and looking at the flow of water from both what's coming off Siberia, off of Russia, so freshwater flows, where the Atlantic water comes in and how all the circulation and things are changing in the Arctic, and then when it, leaves back from north of Greenland. So, as all of our data was looking, we're looking at some of those changes. And then big picture, and I show this to my students, well, how and why does this matter, what goes on in the Arctic? Because as we know, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, it changes everything else. So it changes the air and ocean water currents. And so as I said, we were collecting data. The data shows that the Arctic is changing, and the Arctic, when the Arctic changes, everything else changes. And since it changes temperature of water and heat in the air, that's why we're having climate change. And so it was very interesting. I gave a presentation to the board the other day, and my school board, and fairly conservative school board, and sort of said, here's the data. And, when you ask, is climate change happening? Here's the scientific answer, yes. And we were part of this. And a couple of them sort of raised their eyebrows a little bit, but most of them they're like, oh, that makes sense. So even some of our skeptics. What were we doing and how were we sciencing? So I was part of the water chemistry team with Laura. We were, dropping a rosette multiple times a day. And we're testing water for a variety of different things and taking sample after sample after sample. And some of those samples were analyzed. There was a Russian team that we were also working with. They were doing lots of dissolved oxygen right off the top. And then we were sampling for, some nitrates, some other kinds of chemicals, and all of that. Laura had to arrange to get suitcases back full of, I don't remember, thousands of samples back to Alaska before they thawed. So, but basically what we did, the rosette left out through the side of the ship on this little hoist and then dropped into the water. Other things that were going on, lots of mooring work. They brought up a mooring that, it's a big anchor, flat anchor, which all kinds of instruments that are designed to, capture data for years and years about the water profile. They brought up one that had been from 2018, and they were very excited about that because they actually got some data, because when they last left, they didn't know if they were going to get back. And then I think we put 8 more mooring stations. One of the other things that a newer thing, and this is what Lauren Kipp was doing, is looking at radium samples, and the change of radium as it comes off can be used as a tracer to see what's happening in the Arctic as well. And then one of the other things, and this was with Elena, I was working with the GLOBE program, which I was taking cloud observations. So my students, some of them were trying to do that, but so I would go every day when I could, try to time a satellite across and then take pictures of the clouds and upload that when I could. Our goals, and this was for Lauren for the radium, what was happening and how is it changing in climate change? When they water sampled, this was her first year out there, but she's going back again every 2 years. She did an instrument. This was really cool. It's like it's like an algae sampler, but it was a radium sampler. So it's sitting down under the ice and is going to collect, every month for 2 years and collect the radium samples, which was pretty awesome. What was pretty cool is, as she was putting that on, some of the techs who were, a little bit older and used to things were like, so what can you tell us about this? And just sort of questioning her about this. And, she was just like, well, I designed it. What do you want to know? Like, they were looking for the book and she basically designed it and wrote it. What they do again for the radium, and again, this is what they collected through manganese. They're taking all this because we were also dumping, basically dumping a pump off the side, holding onto a hose, again, several times a day, all night, collecting water, and then they collect it through manganese, and then looking at ash and looking at the radioactive isotope decay. Laura is specifically ice things. I think we'll come back and talk to her if she wants to participate. Other things that we got the opportunity to do, I did get to go out on the ice. That was an awesome experience. They did some ice samples. They had to crane us up over and put it on. But what was really interesting is the Tryoshnikov, they don't send a bear guard down on the ice with you. They have someone standing, supposedly watching, or several people watching, but they're, 10 stories up, and we're all looking. They can only fit 8 people on this little basket, and there are 15 of us on the ice. So I think we're all playing that little mental calculus of, okay, if they spot a bear, who can I run faster than and get on the ice quicker than? So we did get a chance to spend it, and that was really a pretty amazing experience as they were doing all kinds of stuff. I also, Igor had said, oh, by the way, John, you're going on the ice and you're going to be working with Float Your Boat. Float Your Boat is a Seattle-based organization. They make these little wooden boats. Students decorate them from Seattle Public Schools and other schools. And then we actually co-opted one that only had like some girl's name on it. So we decorated them. And then it was my job to put them out. So I did my little artistic thing and spelled out Arctic 2021 on the ice and left them. And then what happens is all the boats have floatboat.org, and then they all have a number in them. So if they show up and somebody finds them, hopefully they get online and then log them in. And I know I've put the people, it sounds like Sarah's going to be doing something with them. And then I know you said Bill may have done something with them already. I'm having them ship me some boats this spring. So my ecology club kids and my art department, the art kids, club kids, we're going to get together and decorate some and send them back for some future expedition. What was
John,
really cool.
can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Did you put any kind of buoy with the boats out there,
Yeah.
or just the boats?
So the boats are there in the background of this one picture. We were at the ice station, so there was a buoy out there. So that's how they know. And I marked exactly where it was deployed. So that's how they know where they were deployed.
Awesome.
But no, the boats just float on their own, and they just found some, I think, in Iceland that were set from the North Pole in 2018 or something. So yeah, it's a really great thing and great to get the kids involved. And it was just sort of last minute. I'm like, okay, I can go play on the ice. It was fun. So yeah, they put up the ice tethered profilers that are, down on the ice. So it was next to the buoy, so we knew exactly where those boats and things were. So yeah, when I was there, I mean, my job was I got to talk to anybody and everybody who would listen and who would let me talk to and tag along. And so I basically and this is the best thing about Polar Trek, you're going to learn an awful lot about things you don't know about. So I got to find out how they, what they were doing to drill and how they worked and how everything worked. We were doing ice cores. We had an international team, some scientists from Japan sending some microwave radiation across. The woman from Denmark who was also looking at ice cores and looking at, dissolved samples. What was really cool is there is one of the instruments that, they had to recalibrate, but because the boat is metal, they had to actually recalibrate it. So they're not actually, in the bottom picture, they're not doing ice work. They're recalibrating an instrument. They had to put it on a turntable in a box and spin it around to make sure the magnets or the compass and stuff was calibrated, but they had to do that off the boat and then take it back on. And then somebody was asking about a camera. They did take I think it was a GoPro and attached it just to the top of the CTD probe that they dropped under the ice and took some film there. And it worked really well. So the other thing I got to do, my classes were in session, so I did some truly remote teaching. We got on the ship and I actually did a class from Norway after I got out of quarantine, and then did a class, a couple classes, tried to do a bunch of different classes. Now we got on the ship, they said we were going to have internet access, as long as we're not too far north. Well, there was one Ethernet cord basically for everybody. That was all of the crew and all of the science people. So we didn't have internet access, and for days and days and days, we didn't have much at all. So what I was able to do is when I did have internet, I put together some Google Slides, and then because I had shared them with my substitute and some of my colleagues back home, they were able to do that. So they actually did the slides. When we actually did internet, I didn't even have a strong enough connection. We used, what did we use? We tried FaceTime, didn't work. We tried a whole bunch of different kinds of things. I think we ended up using WhatsApp. They could see me, I couldn't see them. But I did get a chance to talk to my classes. My classes got to talk to them. And what also was great, because we're all in the same computer lab as the journals were coming back. We had people whose families were reading the journals and the kids, and then a lot of the kids were asking questions. So, Laura and Lauren and some of the other scientists were eagerly writing back to my students and commenting, which was great because they were so excited they got to hear from real scientists. So that was really fun. We did the great styrofoam cup experiment. You send stuff down on the cast and shrink it. And so the kids loved that, and what was happening to that, and talking about, and it was great when I got back and we're doing pressure and temperature, those kind of things. So again, a good educational tie-in right there. And one of the classes actually used the information and took some measurements of the actual cups I brought back compared to the other ones and did some calculations. So they've sort of gone with that earlier as well. Now, it was COVID. And again, as everyone thinks, I have never taken more COVID tests in my life and had my brain probed more times in my life. It was a little crazy. So the most I've ever been scared for any test in my life was the morning before I left. I had to get a PCR test done I had to get the results back within 24 hours, what they said, of when I was landing in Norway. Now, everybody else heard different things, but so I had to get a PCR. So I fortunately failed that test or passed that test. When we got to Oslo, basically, if you had an electronic vaccine card, you were from the EU or you're from Norway, you sail right in. You didn't, you just sort of stood in a line and they waited, and then we had to go quarantine test. And then we spent about 8 days in a quarantine hotel. What they did, they put everyone on a bus, and wherever the closest unfilled quarantine hotel was, they just dropped people off. Some people were on the grounds of the airport. Some people were in Oslo, which was great because they got to run around Oslo, couldn't go into stuff. I ended up in like a sort of nice hotel in the suburbs. Fortunately, the weather was beautiful and there was stuff to do. But they dropped food off 3 times a day and then snacks and stuff. And you were allowed out. We were allowed out. They said for no more than 2 hours a day, but I could, what that meant was I could go out for 2 hours and then come back, check in, and then go back out again. So it made it for an extra, 10 days as we were there. Again, I was in a nice area. They, outside of Oslo, they had lots of bike paths, bike trails. So there was all kinds of stuff going on. There was a little ski hill. So I walked anywhere from 5 to 12 miles every day. They had the little scooters. I got a chance to do that. There was a Frisbee golf course. I never Frisbee, but at least, walked the golf course. And again, I was blessed with beautiful weather. So it made it that much better. And then I got, very lucky because again, the procedures are crazy. I got in on a Friday. They said, oh, you're getting on Friday. They came back when I said I was supposed to have my COVID test. They said, no, you can't, because they didn't check everyone into the hotel, even though I was there early in the morning. They didn't check everyone until later. So you're not getting tested until Saturday. You won't get your results back to Monday, maybe Tuesday. Well, Tuesday I had to already be on a plane flying north. So a woman took great pity on me, and she actually drove me into Oslo to get another COVID test, drove me back. It was a rapid one. She's like, look, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get, when we get your results back, if they're negative, and we sort of assume they are, you have to leave, because I have to leave here at 3 p.m. And if you're not out of the hotel, you can't leave for 3 more days. So, it was a little bit, so like literally I came back packed, and like as soon as they called, I left the hotel with like 20 minutes to spare, to get out. So yeah, the procedures, it made it for a quite interesting time. But, they didn't have much COVID there. Some people were walking around masked, most people were not. And, it wasn't, most of the buildings people were still. I did get a chance to explore Oslo, which is a great city if you ever get the chance to go. And I like wandering around, taking random pictures. On the bottom, you can check your dog. If you go to a restaurant and they won't let the dog in the restaurant, you can park it in a little air-conditioned kennel, heated kennel to do there. They had a ski hill. In the back, that's a grain silo. They did dorms, and this was in a beautiful sculpture park, and it's a bronze sculpture of a woman who's actually peeing, and it's basically she's peeing on the patriarchy and stuff, and protesting against stuff. So some really cool things that I did get a chance to see. This is also the Opera House, and there is you can walk up on the top, and then there's like an iceberg in the middle. So Oslo, if you ever get a chance to go, is a great city. One of the other things I had the great fortune, there is the Fram Museum, which is one of the earliest polar expeditions, who basically sailed the same route that we did. So I had taken pictures at the Fram Museum and then compared it to the Tryoshnikov and decided who would win. They had some cool stuff, but I was a little nervous. Like, you get on a ship and you're out in the ice and the ship is moving and rocking and rolling, and I'm like, I don't see how these early Arctic explorers would basically, moor themselves into the ice for years and years and years with nothing but like a thin wooden hull in between them. They were badass. So, but that was pretty fun. Another highlight of Oslo. Did a lot of where I was, spent the time on the ship. We left the ship. My cabin was there. I was above deck. Everything was locked down, which again, the first day they said, hopefully everything's locked in because we're sailed away into a storm. One of the last nights, I'm sitting in the bed and the ship rocked so much, I like slid into the bed, slid into the wall. The ship was very nice, very 1970s paneled on the inside. They had a library. There were about 15 English books. Everything else was in Russian. This is the fitness center. They did have a sauna that some people used, which was, nice. And then, there was an elevator, I think, as Laura would say, the first time we got on it, we couldn't figure out because all the floors are numbered differently. That was the only time I ever used the elevator. Food was generally good, but after the third time they served, or fourth time they served beef tongue, I think we were all done. They had a doctor on the ship who also doubled as a dentist, with a surgery room, everything else. And his advice to me when I talked to him was, don't get sick, don't die. Like, okay, that's good advice to, from the ship's doctor. And then lots of, again, I like random things, we got on the ship and there are all these arrows that point up. So, and as we're all going on, we're like, okay, well, these are the up staircases. Where are the down staircases? We couldn't find them. We finally realized later that these are evacuation arrows. So, every staircase would go up, just like all the exit doors, to get out on the outside of the ship, say, do not enter. Our favorite was, and one of my favorites was, they had a Russian menu and they finally translated into English, but I would always, I called it Russian food roulette. I just look and see what was on the menu and try to guess what they'd be serving us. And then there was they had a freezer in one of our labs, like, oh, don't worry if you get stuck in the freezer. Well, and I'd posted that early on in the trip and people were freaking out. I'd posted on Facebook and so I had to follow up and show that, no, there was a little latch inside the freezer. So if you did get locked in, you were okay. The Arctic was beautiful. We had some amazing days, just sunny, beautiful. The ice, I spent a lot of time, they never changed our clocks, really, unfortunately. We got on the ship and it was on Moscow time. And so that never changed. So, Laura and I worked from 8:30 to 8:30. She worked most of the time. But then when we, a lot of times during the day it was dark and at night it was light. So I would wake up because it was light in the room or you hear ice. And then I'd look out my window and spend 20 minutes watching the ice move out my window and then get up and get dressed and go wander around on the deck and just watching the scenery. I mean, just, for people, if you haven't, if you haven't been to the Arctic and just how stark and remote and I would say color, like this was, the green of the ship was the only color really we saw. I mean, when I got back, green almost felt offensive to me because you get so used to just seeing gray and blue and gray and blue and then some reds and stuff. But it was pretty spectacular. They had 2 polar bear sightings. We never saw them, but one of our close to our last days, one of them just right before breakfast came up and hung out and spent a lot of time, wandering around, which was awesome. We did see one night of northern lights, but it was mostly cloudy there. But when this middle pictures, when we got back to Kirkenes, had a nice northern light show. So that was really good. And then that's, I just, posted this. This was, as we called the NABOS family photo. We all got on the ice to take a picture. And again, everyone was a little worried if a bear would show up. But so that was my expedition. Again, I learned a tremendous amount. The researchers were awesome. They took me under their wing. They explained stuff to me. They put me to work. We worked some really hard days, but it was worth it. It's for those of you going on a ship, if you haven't been on a ship, it's a really different experience because it can be sort of isolating. And especially, I think this time, I think long cruises get to people, but I think this time with a COVID quarantine and then the ship and then totally remote, it was a little bit interesting. So, and there wasn't as much social interaction. It was interesting. The Russians had been told sort of not to interact with us a little bit. And, but after about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, people were really much more, interacting. Like I finally talked to and met the guys who I was living next to. But yeah, I came back. My students were very excited. They've been very excited to follow along. Igor, Laura, and Lauren sort of spoke to my classes. They did a live visit and the kids and a bunch of other classes were really, enthusiastic. And it's interesting. We start every day with a news article and how many times the kids are pulling up Arctic articles and Antarctic articles and, just sort of talking about the Arctic, which is, something I've never been exposed to. So that for me has been great. So that was my trip.
Awesome. Yeah, so Judy just put down in the chat that now, go ahead and ask your questions. But very interesting experience. While you were talking there, John, I was asking Laura about her quarantining. It doesn't sound nearly as nice as yours was. So, and
No.
she was also sharing how many samples you collected and how you
Yep.
helped out with her project. So,
Yeah.
very
Laura,
cool.
do you want to add anything? I can put you on the spot.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I have anything to add that I didn't throw in the chat, but I'm happy to help field questions if it's relevant for people.
Okay. Oh, Sarah, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
So John, what was like something that was the most kind of surprising, something you found in the whole experience that was like surprisingly challenging, as well as something that was surprisingly easier than you expected?
Surprisingly challenging. I think for me it was interesting because I think the time and the sort of day night. So I'd been on the Healy 12 years ago, and we were in the Arctic, but it was summer, so it was light all the time, and I worked night shifts, and I got really used to not sleeping, not sleeping. But because it was light all the time, it was different. I actually found this, our clock time, at one point we were 11 hours ahead of, on ship time was 11 hours behind what sort of real time was. So, there were days like, I think this picture, I think we decided was sunset. There were days that like 8 of us got up, took pictures of the sun, and nobody knew whether the sun was setting or rising. We just couldn't tell. I think that was really sort of challenging, that I was working during the day, and when my brain had said day and all the meals and everything was day, and then yet the day night cycles were totally opposite. Had it been either all dark or all light, I think it would have been easier. I think the other thing that we found, it was, and this is what I would encourage, we played a lot of cards, we played, games and stuff. Definitely bring stuff that's sort of small, entertainable, packable, especially if you are on a ship thing to bring people together. There was no real opportunity and very few places to bring people together. So it got a little isolating. And especially after COVID, I think that was hard. What I found, I would say, most surprising and most sort of rewarding, again, I'd been fortunate to be to the Arctic once, and I just remember being so like, awe-inspired by it and the starkness and things like that. And then I'm like, I've wanted to go back. And I thought I'd sort of built it up in my mind to be this thing that it probably wasn't. And then I got back, and again, I would stand out on the deck and watch the ship move through the ice, and watch the ice, and watch the clouds, and just that whole experience of being so vast is just that's probably the amazing. And I was so excited that I felt that way, and probably even more again.
Cool.
I might add to John's comment about the time that was one of the most challenging parts of the cruise, was that the time was playing a funky game with us. And he mentioned that we had one day where we were all up around the same time, and we all had pictures of the same sunset or sunrise, and we for a good 24 hours went back and forth about whether that was sunset or sunrise. And that is what I want to point out is that's abnormal. To have that situation on most cruises, you might not change ship time every time zone, but when you get to a specific distance away from the actual time zone, you'll eventually switch time zones, and that just didn't happen on this cruise. So I think everybody was struggling a bit with time.
Yeah.
So interesting. All right, Elaine, do you want to ask a question? Elaine, are you there?
I am there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I wanted to know, you mentioned you were putting the water rosette to study radium, and I want to know why you're specifically tracking radium to measure climate change.
So again, the rosette wasn't necessarily doing radium. If I go back, the radium was done. We took a pump over the side. So this was Lauren Kipp from Rowan University. we would drop a pump over the side, and you can see that on the right-hand side of this picture. It would, with like basically a fire hose on it, would pump, you know, gallons and gallons of water. They would then filter that water through the manganese. And what radium is when radium comes off it's an indicator of fresh water and stuff coming off the shelf. So radium and thorium are the isotopes. So what it does is it tells you how much freshwater influx you're getting in some places, how much sort of turnover you may be getting in some places, because it should be pretty stable. And in some places they expected no radium, but at other places they expected a lot. So what they're really doing is trying to build up a baseline. Laura, I know, has studied the rivers that feed from, you know, from Siberia into the Arctic. And so there are lots of people, I guess, who've been studying the radium levels, you know, as you go from, you know, freshwater to saltwater to the coast, but now it's, you know, on the shelf. Laura, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that radium, you get it in the seawater, you get a signal of radium from when it comes in contact with the sediments. And their shelves that we were proximal to are very shallow. So those waters have a lot of contact with the sediment. And what Lauren is using radium to you know, what story she's trying to tell with that is to talk about how much movement and how much communication between the shelf environment and the basin environment there is. And she's trying to get some idea of if that's changing with time.
Does that help, Elaine? Answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Great explanation from both of you. Jon, you've learned so much. You've grown.
Yes, I have. And I actually remember it too. So
Very
Yeah.
awesome. Sarah, did you have your hand back up again, or did you? I don't know. I lost track of that. Maybe you have another question.
Oh, I do have another question, but
Okay,
I
go
never
ahead.
put my hand down, I guess. So as I've been learning about data sharing in the Arctic, the Russians, and there's so many countries and so many, I think data sharing in Colorado is challenging. Data sharing in the ocean, in Arctic Ocean sounds really challenging. And I'm just curious, like, so you were Americans on a Russian ship in waters that a lot of Americans maybe don't get to travel through. Can you talk about some of the, like, I don't know if you know much about this, Jon, or somebody, I don't know. I'm just curious, like, how that came about, or the whole, yeah, the relationship of
right.
human beings in this.
Well, so we were working also with the group from Russia. There was a Russian chemistry team and a Russian water team and a Russian team. So they were collecting data at the same time. So like as I was collecting here, this is one of the Russians who was also collecting samples. So it's what IARC was their International Arctic Research. No, that's the wrong one. We're collecting ARI, sorry. The Arctic Research Institution were collecting from St. Petersburg. They had the St. Petersburg team, we had our team. I don't know exactly how the connection went, but you know, Igor Polyakov is also, you know, has had interactions with them. I know at some points we were not allowed to collect data in certain places if we were too close to the, you know, within sort of Russian territorial waters or whatever. In other places we were allowed to collect. But yeah, I don't quite know how they coordinated all of that and whether it was Igor and then, you know, Ari, or whether that was something the ship has been going on for a while. Laura, do you know some of the backstory?
Yeah, I know a little bit of the backstory. So this program, NABOS, is kind of Igor's brainchild. He used to work at ARI in Russia. And when he moved to the US, he really wanted to maintain his connections with Russia. And for a long time, this collaboration allowed us to sample in Russian waters. And that, whether or not we get permission to do that, has varied a lot with the political climate. And I know Igor struggled a bit on this last cruise to really get the ship scheduled and to figure out what our permissions were. So in this case, we were, we're maintaining this collaboration with Russian scientists because that's so valuable, but we weren't allowed to sample in Russian waters. So that's kind of what Jon was talking about is, if you're bordering an ocean, your country has an EEZ, which is just your economic zone. And that's maybe like 100 miles from land or something like that. So Russia has a lot of stake in the Arctic, and our cruise track basically kind of sat on the edge of the Russian EEZ to get us as close to those shelf waters as we could get.
Elena, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, I think Laura did a great job. And it is really mainly due to Igor's relationship. I mean, that has been built over so many years of research with Russian researchers. It's really a continuing building of a relationship and maintaining relationships. And like Laura said, it depends on the political situation. And there was a time when, and it was bad, and all permits were canceled for research. So, yep.
Yeah, I think one of the things to like point out again there is that maintaining these relationships is also a really big challenge, and Igor's put a lot of time into that. But as he moves on with his career, we as a community have to try and to continue to maintain those relationships in a positive way to keep this program going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot that, like, ARCIS in general as an organization, we run into that a lot, where we're trying to bring together, Arctic researchers, and so it's a big community, and politics does play a role in it. And as Elena said, that relationship piece and building is key to it, because a lot of Arctic research is international and it's interdisciplinary nowadays, and but maintaining those relationships and keeping them open is always a challenge. A great question. Anything else? Anybody else? Cassie or Jocelyn? Bill? All right.
If we're waiting, I would say one of the other takeaways, and I was thinking about this, and I repeat it, and so I've repeated it enough, I sometimes almost forget to say it again. 12 years ago when I was on the Healy, a US Coast Guard ship, and working with a bunch of people, my exposure to the Arctic and to Arctic research was basically a lot of, older white male scientists. And, I think in our original one, we had, one female scientist who was, relatively early career, and a couple other assistants, but I would say it was probably 80% male, if not more. And what was really sort of interesting and refreshing, and just, as so many, younger women, early career scientists who are doing some amazing work. And, Laura, I've said, I'm just bowled over by, not only how good they are in science, but how great they are in communicating and in explaining and in managing and organizing. And, it was so sort of refreshing to see, some people put in their place when they need to be put in their place, and some, just sort of I don't know if it was just this ship, but it was both the Russians and, the US team, how really just, it seems to be becoming a lot more egalitarian and a lot more, women in science. And again, I teach science. I've always tried to encourage all my students I teach in a very underrepresented community in terms of, STEM fields and stuff. And, my wife is always teasing me like, oh, you brainwashed another one to go into biology. And, that's been the good thing. And so that, I think, was a really big change. And I don't know if the rest of you, will have that experience or not, but it was really amazing to see.
I appreciate you saying that, John. And just to draw another comparison, this cruise goes out generally every other year. And on the 2018 cruise, there was one female scientist. So even just comparing between 2018 and 2021, there was a pretty big change.
Yeah.
Looks like Sarah Crowley, you have your hand up.
Yeah, John, I feel like you've said a few different things about like what your students got out of it, or that they were really excited to like even just bring in articles about the Arctic or Antarctic. But I'm curious, maybe like in the long run, what do you think the impact is going to be for like students you teach now, or if you're teaching in the future, or what do you think people might get the most out of what you're sharing? Does that make sense?
I think it's really, and that's a great question. What I think it's really that they can actually see, my students don't know scientists. Like, they can name pop stars, you can name athletes, you can name that. They don't know, they don't know scientists. They don't have any idea of, maybe Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye, and, they don't know anybody else. And so they're very remote. I think the idea that students can actually see that, and they've interacted with scientists was big. I mean, it comes up all the time. I also think that, one of the things I'm still working on my curriculum is to look in idea of, when I was 16, I grew up in Ohio. I'm like, I didn't know the ocean. I'd been to the ocean. That was it. If you had told me I would have had the opportunity to be in the Arctic twice and spend, almost 3 months total there, I would have been like, yeah, you're out of your mind. Like no one, I never had any role models who would have said, hey, you could actually do that. So I think for my students for them to see one of their teachers do that is big. And it does happen. I mean, my substitute, some of you know this, I was fortunate enough that my substitute who took over was a former student of mine. He actually was in my class when I was in the Arctic the first time. And, when he like introduced himself and talked to the kids, he goes, yeah, I remember Mr. Pazol talked to us from the Arctic and he did this and that was so cool. And, it's amazing that they do that and they come back. And so I think the kids, not only seeing that they could be scientists, that scientists are people too, but just that, they can see us, but also the idea that there are lots of other ways that if you would want and are interested in the Arctic or the Antarctic or polar science, or just even to get out and explore outside of your little bubble, that they can. So I did spend a lot of time talking to people and interviewing, the science party and others of, how did you get here? What advice would you give to your 16-year-old self? And we spent time in class and a bunch of other classes, looking at stuff like, oh, what's your potential career and could you have that? So I have a lot of kids who want to do auto mechanics. I'm like, why just settle for automobiles? You want to be on a ship? Yeah, it sounds cool, but I wouldn't have anything to do there. Are you kidding? Like, look at all the mechanical stuff. How about computers? How about art? We had a documentary filmmaker. Those people are artists. How about the medical people? Just to show that they can get out and, again, escape the little bubble. It's funny, I live in a very international community, but a lot of our kids, they live they live in our suburb and they go to Mexico to visit family and that's it. I mean, I can't tell you how often when I take kids to Lake Michigan, which is 12 miles away, that I have kids who were born here who've never been to Lake Michigan, ever. They have their own tiny bubble. So I'm always about, let's expand that and see if you can get out and explore. So that's what I'm hoping the takeaway for them will be.
Cassie, do you want to, I'll raise your hand for you. Here you go.
Thanks. Sorry, I was texting. I couldn't figure out the raise hand feature in case we haven't been on Zoom for a million hours in the last 2 years. But John, really, I think you just answered, in answering Sarah's question. I was just asking kind of about what you think your students' biggest takeaways have been so far. And I love hearing, you just wanting them to see the experience and to know that the bigger world is out there. Because I think my population of students very similarly to yours, and just seeing, beyond like Springdale, Arkansas, hey, I don't have to be here forever, that there's this big reach in the world beyond my, visiting family in Mexico, and I come right back here and I stay in my 10-mile radius bubble and never moving on. So that's awesome. Awesome to hear.
Okay, very nice. Well, anything else? Thoughts?
So I look forward to following along with everybody else. I'm totally jealous because if you said, hey, you want to go back again? Absolutely. So, I'm always telling Laura if she needs another lab assistant and our original lab assistant won't, call me in 2 years, I'll come back. So
Sweet. Yeah, we're excited about that project. We hope to have a couple more teachers on it. So you might have a little gaggle of you that can work together, which will be fun. All right. Well, we appreciate your time and you sharing, Jon. It was very interesting to hear all about what you did out there. Jon and I, for those of you who don't know, we kind of communicated through WhatsApp and other weird ways to make it happen. And it was really exciting that you were able to communicate with your students when I saw those emails going back and forth. I think that was awesome because that doesn't happen usually on such remote situations. But so just a reminder for our cohorts, you all can still communicate through Matters Most if you haven't done that and ask questions. I know Sarah Johnson's been posting there a little bit, and I think Bill has been as well. So we want to just remind you that's a tool for you to keep carrying on these discussions and chats. I think our next event, Sarah and Judy, is about inspiration. Is that it? Yes, inspiration. Okay. We'll stay tuned for what that looks like through this roundtable. And I think also that went out in an email today was we did get some videos from at least one researcher. Yeah, Lee Cooper, and we're expecting and another one from Jeremy May and maybe from Byron Adams in the future. So kind of researchers' perspectives and them sharing about having Polar Trek teachers and their experience is coming your way. And I think that's it. So thanks everybody for joining, especially to Jon for sharing. Great presentation. I'm glad Laura and Elena were also able to join us. And everybody have a great night.
thank you.